A lot of people have told us that T.Rex Arms needs to become the Amazon of the gun industry. We need to sell everything, which we're absolutely not going to do. However, as of this week, we are a bookstore. So we've decided to sell books, which shouldn't really come as too much of a surprise. If you've been watching the show for a while and our other YouTube channels will know that we talk about books quite a bit, and we've recommended books on a number of occasions. But right now on the T.Rex site, we are selling a number of books. Books about shooting, books about self-defense, and some Marine Corps tactical manuals and military publications. There's also a reading list up there of other people's books. But what's kind of interesting about these books is we didn't just carry them, we actually reprinted them ourselves. And the reason for that is really simple. Over the years, I have bought a lot of military field manuals, and the quality has always been hit or miss. Sometimes it's decent printing quality, it's readable text, but it's just way too small because this was meant to be a bigger book. And then sometimes it's much worse. Not only is this really small, but it's just a terrible print of a Xerox copy of a very obsolete version of this particular publication. And as much as I love margins for taking notes in the book, this is too much, even for me. So we decided that it was worth printing our own book simply so that we could guarantee the kind of quality that you have come to expect from T.Rex Arms. And then we thought, if we're going to reprint it anyway, why not just retypeset the entire thing from scratch? So, if you're going to make your own military publications and reprint them, why not retypeset them? I've typeset a few books in the past, so it's not as hard as you might think, but it was harder than I thought, simply because of how military publications are generally built. Generally built inside of Word by some hapless E2 that is given the task. If you are in the military, never let anybody know that you can use Word or type.
I have a rare and mysterious skill that precludes me from going on the missions.
Typing.
Can you type?
No.
When you dig through the original PDFs inside of InDesign or something like that, you find a whole bunch of like almost digital Post-it notes hidden behind some of the pictures, instructions for the guys that are actually putting the stuff together. But there's a lot of other stuff to clean up just besides that. Some of the original fonts, some of the original pictures were low resolution, so we have improved those with the artificial intelligence tool inside of Photoshop so that they are higher resolution and sharper. They have been enhanced.
Enhance! Enhance!
That's not how it works in real life. You can't create information from nothing.
But the main things that we did are just kind of quality of life improvements to the book overall. So better fonts. We laid things out with a font called Atkinson Hyperlegible, which is actually developed by the Braille Foundation. It's for people with compromised vision, but it's actually great for stuff like this that has a lot of technical jargon, a lot of numbers and letters together, a lot of acronyms. So I think that that is a significant improvement to the readability of the document. And just extra things like proper page numbers so that you can really quickly find page numbers just by flipping through the corners of the book. But we also kept all the section numbers as well, so that if you're referencing specific pages of this publication from another publication, you can find those. But if you're reading just this book, then you can flip through and find proper section titles here really easily, something that was missing from the original and all of the reprints. So after we have done all of this work, we can make sure that what is being printed is the right scale, the right resolution, and is just going to be the best possible reading experience. But it is a fair amount of work. So the real question that we have for you guys is, how much of an improvement was this? But if we're going to do this to other military manuals, what is the cream of the crop? What really deserves to be improved and reprinted for your consumption? So we're not just a bookstore. T.Rex Arms is now a publisher, and what we publish next really depends upon you guys, what it is that you're looking for, what it is that you want. And because we're recording this video before we've technically started selling the books, I have no idea what demand is going to be. But I am really happy with how the project has turned out. There's a bunch of information I think is really, really important in some of these books, and I appreciate the fact that we have the best feeling, best looking books of these particular publications. And it took me a little longer than I thought, and it was a little bit more finicky, but there are better ways to reprint these things if that is useful. I'm experimenting with some different tools that makes this conversion more simple, and that brings me back to something we've talked about in T.Rex Labs a little bit more often. Libraries of information are really important. You guys should be collecting libraries of the important field manuals or other publications, and in digital format if that's the easiest, best way to do it. But there is value in physical copies of these. Not only are they, more resilient when it comes to certain sort of situations, like when you don't have electricity, but also the paper book that you bought 10 years ago and is sitting on your shelf has not been changed. You can open it up and verify that it says what you thought it said because you read it 10 years ago. A lot of stuff that's on the internet isn't that tamper-proof. So one of the things that I think would be incredibly valuable, either for T.Rex Arms to do or somebody else, is to begin collecting the most important works, the most important documents, the most important manuals for how to do certain things, and have those in a digital format so that they're very easily distributed, backed up. Anybody can have them kind of regardless of cost. But then also make sure that printed copies are available. So it's fun to be experimenting with some different ways of turning digital copies of things into physical copies that are, I would say they have a little bit of a value add. And T.Rex isn't going to be able to do this for everything. This is going to be a larger community project. As you can see from our warehouse, we just don't have room for all the books that I would like to own, let alone sell, in quantities. But there's a kind of an interesting development in that phase too. So in the early 2000s, there was a company that built something called the espresso machine, which didn't make coffee, but it did make books in about the same time that it takes to make a coffee. The espresso machine could take a PDF file and in a few minutes spit out a perfectly bound trade paperback, 6 inches by 9 inches on regular paper with a color cover trimmed and, of reasonable quality. And the idea was that these things would live inside small bookstores so that you could order any book that you wanted and you could get a paperback version. Now, as cool a concept as it is for a little factory in a little town in Tennessee to have a high quality robotic book scanner and a really cool instant book printer, I'm not recommending that you go out and buy an espresso machine for a couple reasons. Number one, they were really finicky and required a huge amount of maintenance. And number two, the company isn't even around anymore. Plus, not everybody needs to get into this particular business, which hasn't proved itself as a business model. But everybody does need to be stockpiling information. And as great as it is to have a digital copy of all of the field manuals and books and information that you think that you're going to need access to in the future, hard copies are great. A hard copy is going to be a little bit more resilient in certain circumstances, outside of house fires maybe. But the other great thing about it is that it cannot be changed. If you have a copy of this book and you have it on a shelf for 10 years, you can confidently pull it off the shelf and know that you have access to the scouting and patrolling information that was published 10 years ago and it hasn't been changed. This is kind of a huge deal, especially at the moment. So stockpiling that information is incredibly valuable. If you do not have your own hands on a piece of information, a book or a document or a manual or whatever, you cannot presume that you will have access to that information in the future. Maybe there's a good chance, maybe there's a bad chance, but the only way that you can know for sure is to actually have some level of control over a physical copy or a digital copy that you really fully understand how it is that you're saving it and backing it up and preventing it from being AI meddled with or whatever the actual threat model is going to be. So as T.Rex Arms gets into this particular area of publishing and selling books, it's something we're obviously passionate about, but we're really relying on you guys to let us know how to proceed next and what the next steps are. Now, as you know, there's tons of PDFs from the Department of Defense online that you can download. Sometimes people have collected them into zip files with hundreds of files. You should download those and you should have them. In fact, on our website where we sell the field manuals, we also have links to the PDF so you can have the digital version. So the question that I have for you guys is, what is it that you are looking for? We picked a couple of really important field manuals, basic fundamentals. We picked the best ones that covered some of those topics, and we reprinted them. So what I would love to know is, what is it that you guys want? Not the Ranger Handbook. Everybody has already reprinted the Ranger Handbook and the Anarchist Cookbook. And the other popular one is Improvised Munitions. We don't need to do that one. There's already a gazillion copies of USFM 31210 or whichever it's called. I would like to know from you, what are the ones that are really valuable to have as fundamentals, really merit being a hard copy? There's plenty of really interesting stuff that's kind of fringe and kind of interesting. Some of my favorite are from ERIS. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, so we'll put it on the screen here. There's a bunch of fascinating content that you should have and you should be aware of, but what we want to know is what should be in hard copy for you guys. Military guys, let us know what would be helpful for you since you already have access to the original source documents on these. Is there anything that we have done that improves the quality of life to where it is better than you can already get? And then civilian guys, what are some of the key features that you want? There's certain procedural things from the military that you just don't need. They're not part of your day-to-day, everyday life, and they're not skills that you necessarily need to have. All that paperwork is for these guys over here. But are there specific skills? Are there specific things that you really want covered and you want them in that hard copy format? And then within the format itself, do you want the big 8.5 by 11 sized, or do you want the smaller 6 by 9 regular paperback size? We want to figure out what would be most useful for you to justify the work that it takes to do the thing, to create this library. Now, I realize that that is only 5 or 6 books, which is not much of a library, but we have to start somewhere. Fortunately, we also have on the T.Rex website the T.Rex Arms reading list. It's a thing that we've talked about for several years internally. It's a thing that we've talked about on the T.Rex Talk podcast, and there's 50 or 60 books on there. That reading list is something that we have been developing over a fair amount of time, and we're going to keep adding to it. So maybe it's worth keeping an eye on. But I do want your input on the reading list as well. So you can comment on that here, or as we continue to talk about books over on the T.Rex Talk podcast channel. Because, you know, knowledge is power. Continue to train your mind.